Most scholars agree that the passage I just read probably didn't appear in the original version of the Gospel according to St. John. One reason for that is that the end of the previous chapter seems like such a great and fitting ending. But you know, I sure am glad somebody remembered this story. I sure am glad somebody decided it did belong there, because it seems to me that this gospel is not complete without this story. And I'm going to tell you why. Now, it says that this is the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples, but if you count it, he appeared in a room where they were hiding out of fear, but Thomas was not there. He appeared in a room where they were hiding still, and Thomas was there. And then this. But they left out one appearance. He appeared to Mary Magdalene in the garden before he appeared to anyone else. This is actually the fourth time Jesus has appeared to his disciples in the Gospel of John. Now, they've gone back to the only thing they know. They've spent the last 3 years following him, but the one thing these folks know is fishing. They're professionals. After all, Simon, his brother Andrew, the brothers James and John, all fished professionally before they started following Jesus. Now all of their hopes have been dashed. They thought there would be a complete revolution. They thought the Romans would be driven out. There would be a new throne of David put in place, and none of that happened. In fact, the opposite had happened, so the only thing they knew to do was to go back to their previous profession, to what they knew, to fishing. The only problem was when they went back to it, they failed. Peter says, I'm going fishing. The rest says, let's go fishing because we know how to do that. And they fish all night, and they don't catch a thing. These are pros. They're supposed to know how to do this. Just at the break of day, just at morning, when the sun is rising, they can see a shadowy figure standing on the beach. They don't know who it is, but the figure calls out to them and says to them with great intimacy, children. That's what this shadowy figure calls them. Children, you don't have any fish, do you? No. Well, throw your net out on the other side, the right side. They do, and this time they have so many fish they can hardly haul the net in. In fact, they can't quite get it into the boat. Now, when this happens, the gospel says that the disciple whom Jesus loved, who in the Gospel of John, of course, is John. If I had written it, it would have been Michael. But the disciple whom Jesus loved says, this is him. This is Jesus. And Peter, based on that disciple's word, puts on his clothes. I know it seems a little counterintuitive here, but he's been fishing. He's been working. He doesn't have on his clothes. He doesn't want to meet his Lord naked. So he puts on clothes and he jumps in the water and he goes to the shore. The others are left to pull the haul of fish along with the boat until they come to shore. When they arrive at shore, Jesus is there and they can smell the fish already cooking. Nobody says, this is Jesus. Nobody asks, are you Jesus? They just seem to know somehow. He says, come and have breakfast. Bring some of your own fish. Jesus is doing what he always does, right? He's feeding his followers. Bread and fish. We've heard those stories before, haven't we? Feeding multitudes with bread and fish. That's what Jesus does. So he invites them to join him. They eat their breakfast. And then he calls Simon Peter aside. Interestingly enough, he doesn't call him Peter. That's a nickname Jesus has given him. It means rock. Because you see, when the chips were down, when the crunch came, this rock on which the movement was supposed to be founded crumbled. You remember that story. He's outside the place where Jesus is being put on trial. Somebody hears his accent. You know, you can tell when somebody's not from around here because of the way they talk. They hear his Galilean accent, and they say, "You're from there too. You must be one of his followers." He could have said, "Well, I know him, I've heard about him, but we're not that close." He doesn't. He says, "I don't even know him." 3 times he says it. A huge failure on his part, on the part of the one Jesus had chosen to base the entire Jesus movement on. And so when Jesus addresses him, he says, "Simon, son of John," he goes back to the old name. "Do you love me? Do you love me more than these?" He doesn't say what he's referring to with these. The other disciples, the fish, the old way of life, everything that he has built his life upon. Do you love me more than these? And the word that Jesus uses, though Jesus would have been speaking Aramaic, the word in Greek comes from a form of agapeo, the kind of love that God has for us. Do you love me like God has loved you? Simon says, "Lord, you know I love you." He doesn't add, "in spite of the fact that I denied knowing you," although that must have been on his mind. He said, "You know I love you." And Jesus says to him, "Feed my lambs." And then Jesus asks him a second time, using the old name, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And again, Simon says, "Yes, Lord, I love you." Again, Jesus uses the form of the word that means God's love. So Jesus gives him his assignment again: tend my sheep. And then a third time, Jesus asked, and Peter's feelings are hurt because a third time Jesus asks him, "Do you love me?" But we know he has to, right? Any of us, we've been talking about storytelling, any of us who knows anything about stories knows that he denied him 3 times. He has to say 3 times that he loves him to gain the balance. But this time when Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" it's the word for the way brothers and sisters love each other. It's a form of phileo. It's a completely different word. Do you love me like a brother? Do you love me like your dearest friend? And Simon says, "You know, I didn't love you. You know that I do." And Jesus gives him his assignment: feed my sheep. What Jesus does here is so remarkable. Not only does he allow Peter to 3 times profess his love for Jesus after 3 times denying him, Jesus has taken a story of absolutely epic failure. If you think fishing all night not catching any fish is a failure, just think denying even knowing the man who picked you out to lead his movement into the future. What a huge failure. But Jesus, in this little scene, has replaced a story of epic failure with a story of epic forgiveness and epic friendship. After all, that's what Jesus does, isn't it? It really doesn't matter how badly Simon has failed. It matters to Simon, of course. But to Jesus, Jesus comes 3 times. Every single time in order to ask once again, "Do you love me?" And if you can say, "Yes, I do," he gives you the assignment. And it's always the same: tend my lambs, feed my sheep. What Jesus has done is to reframe Peter's whole story. A failure. When the time was crunch came, he should have turns into forgiveness. In essence, with Jesus, our failures are just preparations for us to step in, ask that question of me, and for us to answer everything. I do. It doesn't matter how you have in your life. You may have had epic failures. Just like, and he asked, love me? And if we everything I've done, yes, I do love you. It's all I do love you. Gives us that assignment again. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. There's always the assignment, though. You would have thought Jesus would ask Peter, do you know? Because he denied knowing him. But deeper and more difficult question. Do you love me? Can't stop there. It doesn't stop when we say, oh, yes, Lord, we love you. We're here on Sunday and we love you. Because Jesus says, okay, Monday through Saturday, you feed my sheep. That's your assignment. That's how you show me you love me. The next portion of this story is strange. Jesus makes a kind of prediction. When you were young, you used to own belt, just went wherever you wanted to. But in future days, someone else is going to put a belt around you, and they're going to lead you to places you never intended to go. Now, the writer says that that's to indicate the kind of death that Peter would experience. And traditionally, Peter was supposed to have been crucified upside down because he believed he was worth crucified as his. We also to the tradition, every single one of Jesus' closest disciples died a martyr's death, except for one, John. They had no idea they were going to go and met. Now, that's not just true of those disciples. You know, Methodist preachers are used to taking places they never knew to go because we get sent places. But it's not just preachers. As soon as we say to Jesus in response to his question, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. We need to be prepared to go to those places that he's going to send us. Feed my sheep. Not just the sheep we're comfortable feeding, not just the sheep that we already know, not just the sheep that we associate with us. Jesus sends us to feed. And you remember the stories. Jesus got into trouble for the kind of sheep he associated with. So it doesn't really matter how we may have failed in our own eyes, how we may have failed Jesus. What matters is that Jesus comes to us and asks the question, do you love me? And that we can say to him, yes, Lord, I love you. And not stop there. But to go out to feed his sheep who have no homes to stay in at night. To go out to feed his sheep who have no country to return to because they've been driven out. Who go out to feed the sheep that are struggling with addictions, cannot get their lives together. Go out to feed those sheep who may not know about the love of God for them or may have been driven away from church because of the way we Christians have acted toward them. You see, we all may be sent into places we didn't know we wanted to go. That's what happens when we respond to that question. God replaces the story of our abject failure with a story of forgiveness and the story of friendship. And if you're going to be friends with Jesus, you got to be friends with the friends of Jesus. And they're everywhere. So the good news is, however you failed, those times when you thought you were going to rise to the occasion and the courage just drained out of you and it didn't happen. Those times when you thought you were going to speak a word in defense of someone, but you were silent instead. Jesus comes and he says, I know about that, but the question is, do you love me? And if we can answer yes, he gives us the same assignment. Always the same question. Always the same assignment. Following in the footsteps of the fisherman, Peter, we say, yes, we love you. And he sends us out to feed his sheep. Thanks be to God.